Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'll be running through all of the key updates, key captaincy choices, and transfer options as we look at locking in our sides for our team selections in Game Week 16. Right then, so let's get started by looking at my team performance from Game Week 15. But before we do, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed today's content. So at the end of the video, if you enjoyed it, if you could just press those two buttons, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm aiming for, if possible, 100 likes on this video, and I'm really trying to get to 2,500 subscribers before we hit 2025. So thank you in advance if you did want to do that. In the meantime, though, let's have a look at my team performance. There weren't too many point scorers in the 11, but of course, Cole Palmer was the standout. And I think most people who captained Cole Palmer this week did get a green arrow or at least a decent enough score in Game Week 15. Obviously, huge performance from him in what was a pretty entertaining game all round as well. 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 bonus. You're absolutely laughing. Although it was made a little bit simple because it was originally a bit of a toss-up between Palmer and Salah for the captaincy. Salah, of course, had the Merseyside derby called off about an hour and a half, 2 hours before the deadline. So if you missed out on that news, that is really unfortunate and you can count yourself pretty hard done by, although hopefully you had a decent vice and that helped you get some points anyway. However, in my side, I did know he was going to be missing that game. I put him on my bench because I wasn't really going to mess around too much, and I did in fact already have an 8th strongish attacker. That meant that I didn't need to make any transfer in my team to have a strong enough 11 to go into Game Week 15 with. So I did roll the transfer and I did get a green arrow, 62 points, up to 1.35 million. I shaved off about 300k, and hopefully I can keep doing the same for a few weeks in a row now, because I'd love to get inside the top million in the next couple of weeks and then start making a charge towards that top 100k before we hit chip season. Around my side elsewhere, Rico Lewis had a very busy game, obviously conceded twice, picked up a red card, but not before getting the goal. Finally, he got a goal. But overall, it only gets up to 4 points for him when you take into account all of the other minuses. And of course, he's then banned for Game Week 16 as well. So that is an issue. Porro, a fairly similar story, got an assist, so got an attacking return, but conceded 4 times, so that's -2, so he only comes out with a 3-pointer. Gabriel yet again missing, which is a little bit worrying, and he still hasn't been seen in training yet. More on that later. But of course, I had Hall coming in off my bench to get me an extra point there. Overall, not too many big performers. I think the only other player who got anything was Solanke with that early goal against Chelsea, but it was enough for a green arrow, and that is the main thing at the moment. I did roll a transfer. I've got 2 frees going into Game Week 16, so overall, I can't complain too much. Let me know in the comments below what you scored in Game Week 15 and whether or not it beat me. So let's take a quick look at some of the key issues facing a lot of our sides ahead of Game Week 16, and it's headlined by one man, and that is Gabriel. So Gabriel has missed the last couple of matches now, after coming off after just 45 minutes 2 weeks ago, or 2 game weeks ago now. I think we mostly presume that that would be a precautionary thing and he'd be back straight away, but until this point he still actually hasn't even been seen in training yet, so it might be more of an issue than we had down on paper. And what initially seemed to be maybe even a concussion protocol, now he's gone past that limit for the concussion and we still haven't heard anything about a concussion, so it looks more and more likely that it is actually a muscular thing, and Arteta said as much in his recent press conference as well, saying that now he's playing more games for Brazil as well, it is more likely that he's going to pick up these muscular injuries and they need to be more cautious with him. So he is, of course, a lot of money to be holding on to for an Arsenal defender, taking up a valuable slot in your starting 11. And at the moment, he looks like a risk ahead of Game Week 16 as well. Still hasn't been seen in training, so I think the next couple of days are going to be really crucial as to whether or not he is a player that maybe we either have to look at moving on or make sure that you've got enough depth on your bench to cover him off for another week or two. The frustrating thing is Arsenal have great fixtures, and because of his goal threat from set pieces, which Arsenal are really capitalising on at the moment, it seems like a massive opportunity missed to not have him starting, or to kind of waste an Arsenal defender spot on someone who isn't playing at the moment. So fingers crossed he is back for Game Week 16 and we do hear more in the next couple of days. But it is, of course, frustrating and you do want to keep an eye out for that. Elsewhere, Rico Lewis is almost certainly going to be a sell over the next few weeks. He's been poor regardless. Obviously did get the goal in Game Week 15, but Man City defensively have looked really shaky recently. In fact, just as a team, haven't looked at it at all. And Rico Lewis as well, getting the red card is maybe just now an excuse that tips people over the edge to get rid of him finally. He's in my side, he's on my bench at the moment and would have been anyway, but with Gabriel as a doubt in my starting 11, I might need to shore up my bench just on the off chance that Gabriel doesn't start, and therefore Rico Lewis might be a sell for me. And I'd advise taking a look around your squad as well if Rico Lewis is in there too. Elsewhere, Danny Welbeck and Smith Rowe are frustrating owners. They're being sold off by a lot of people. Smith Rowe in particular, his data has really regressed in the last few game weeks. What I would say with Smith Rowe is whilst the immediate fixtures aren't great, Fulham themselves are about to run into a good period of fixtures with a lot of decent home games in the next 5 or 6 weeks. So if you can hold on to him and you do back him to maybe produce a little bit more goal threat in some what are fairly favourable good home fixtures over the next few, then maybe hide him on your bench for another week and make an assessment ahead of Game Week 17. But I do completely understand people selling him. There are a few options around his price point. Danny Welbeck is a fairly similar issue. He started off the season really well, has tailed off recently, and there are, of course, a lot of other strikers, even at his price point, who are performing well, so I wouldn't hold it against anyone wanting to sell. Ollie Watkins is the final player, an injury doubt after midweek, and given the fact that his minutes have been reduced over the season, but especially in the last few game weeks, I would completely understand anyone just looking for any excuse to get rid of him at this point. I don't think he's quite giving us what he gave us last season, and he's not as locked in as a 90-minute man anymore. Regardless, he is on penalties though, so he's not an immediate sell if you have other issues, but because of the injury doubt, you would have to see him in training, I think, in the next couple of days to have any confidence in holding on to him. I think there is a decent excuse to sell him this week, and personally, I think it's a pretty easy route to someone like Alexander Isak. Speak of the devil, Alexander Isak is, of course, top of the transfer targets this week ahead of Game Week 16. I think it is a perfect jumping on point. It's been very frustrating for me because I did actually own him a couple of weeks ago, but he had his own injury doubt, and I took that as an excuse to downgrade that position and upgrade Mbeumo to Saka, which overall has not paid off thus far. But Alexander Isak, now he's back fit, firing, got all of these different assets in his armory, penalties, great underlying data, 90-minute man, and Callum Wilson looks like he's had another injury setback, meaning he'll be out for another 2 months. So that centre-forward spot is very much Isak's for the foreseeable, with 2 great fixtures against promoted sides to come, and great long-term fixtures. He is top of my transfer targets, although not easy for me to get to in one move. Outside of that, Enzo Fernandez is being bought in by a lot of managers. I discussed him at length in my who to buy video from yesterday, or 2 days ago now, I suppose. So if you want a more elaborate discussion on him and a few of these other picks, do go back and check out that video. A quick flyby though, I think Enzo looks decent for his price, but he is overperforming on the data, and because of the quality Chelsea have in their almost second 11 and off their bench, I would be a little cautious on bringing him in and relying on him as a regular starter. Regardless, the fixtures are good though. Trent Alexander-Arnold is another player I'm really interested in as a bit of a differential, 20% owned, but I would imagine most of those are dead teams at this moment. So in the top ranks, Trent is going to be a fantastic differential for you if you can get there. Liverpool have great fixtures, and Trent's data is very, very strong, as it always has been, but now it's matched up with good defensive data too. I think some big hauls are on the horizon with some good fixtures to come. Timber and Chris Wood also make it onto the top 5. Chris Wood, I think, is a player that I'm not necessarily that interested in right now, but he does continue scoring, and the fixtures aren't amazing, but they're also not too bad either. So at 6.5 million, it always makes a bit of sense to have a look at him as an option in your forward line. Timber could be that replacement for Gabriel should Gabriel be out for another week. a bit cheaper at 5.6 million, and he is getting on the end of corners whilst Gabriel is out. Great partnership down the right-hand side with Saka and with Odegaard as well. So I think he's made his way into their strongest 11. I don't see him coming out anytime soon. So a quick look now at the match projections from Rob T FPL. So do go and check him out on Twitter and Blue Sky if you get the chance. Fantastic work as always from him. And the match projections are predicting a pretty high scoring game week as well. Lots of teams expected to get over 2 goals this week. I'll read them out quickly for you. But if you've got players in attacking positions in any of these teams, you're probably looking quite healthy. Arsenal, Newcastle, Man City, Spurs, Liverpool, Chelsea and Bournemouth are all expected over 2 goals on average against their respective opponents. And it looks like a week where a lot of us have some pretty appealing looking bus teams. And it just has to, I guess, go in your favour with the picks that you've got in those sides. Overall, though, lots of goals on offer for those teams, and there are a few teams that have a decent chance of a clean sheet as well. So Arsenal at over 50%. So that's another reason that you really are hoping that Gabriel's fit if you're an owner, especially if you've got double Arsenal defence like me. That's really good underlying data in terms of the clean sheet odds. 52% is one of the highest we've seen in quite a little while now. Newcastle as well, 42% at home to Leicester. So if you've got the likes of Lewis Hall, you're hoping for the best there. Although Ruud van Nistelrooy might have something to say about that with his new look Leicester side. Liverpool as well, a 40% chance at home to Fulham. So again, if you're looking at bringing in someone like a Van Dijk or a Trent, that's a good jumping on point. Elsewhere, not too much to shout about, but Chelsea have a 34%, so a 1 in 3 chance of keeping a clean sheet at home to Brentford. I personally would be fairly surprised if that happened, given that Brentford are very potent in their forward line, and Chelsea, only 3 clean sheets so far this season. I'd say it's fairly unlikely they are able to do so. So onto the captaincy matrix for game week 16. There are 5 players that I really like the look of for captaincy this week, all 5 of which have home games, all 5 of which are on penalties, and all 5 of which have great fixtures as well. The one differential I wanted to add in to the regulars, I suppose, in this section is Alexander Isak, who has a fantastic fixture against Leicester. It is a good differential opportunity for this week. Penalties, 90-minute man, good data against a team that don't know how to defend regardless, but under their new manager as well, I don't think that defence is going to be the first thing on their mind. So I do expect Newcastle to be able to create plenty of big chances in that match, and Isak looks like a player in form and ready to cash in on that. Elsewhere, 4 premium assets that all have good fixtures. Never discount Haaland, even though it's at home against Man United. We've seen what he can do against United. And despite the fact that City are struggling at the moment, he's never a bad shout. The data is still incredible. He's still got 13 goals this season. So never discount him. If you've still got him, it is a differential opportunity to captain. Although I would say it would be relatively brave to do so, considering the fixtures that some of the other premiums do have. Saka at home to Everton. Everton defensively have been known to lock it out and keep clean sheets even against some of the big boys. I'd expect Arsenal, who have looked potent even in midweek in the Champions League, I think that they'll be able to dismantle them. And I do think Saka is a great player to own and potentially even captain this week as well. Although the reason I wouldn't be recommending him any higher is because both Salah and Palmer, who have both been absolutely inevitable this season, have, I would say, either slightly better fixtures or far enough better data that you could probably overlook someone like Saka this week. Salah has not the easiest fixture. Against Fulham at home, it is still not a bad fixture by any means, and Salah has had a recent rest from game week 15 because of the Merseyside derby being called off. Played in midweek, scored yet again, of course, and the data is now even better than Erling Haaland's. In fact, it's the best in the game out of all of the players in the database at 0.96. So very, very good data. Obviously, 21 attacking returns as well, can't go unnoticed. But again, another opportunity for him to cash in against a side that, whilst not bad defensively by any means, you'd expect Liverpool to be able to beat. And there is, of course, just a strong argument at this point to say that, you know what, Salah is scoring in every single week. He's only blanked twice this season, and he's only failed to get a double-digit haul 4 times in 15 game weeks. I suppose in 14, if you take off last week and his cancelled game. So that's an incredible return, and obviously the odds of bagging yourself a pretty decent haul, a double-digit haul, are very, very good if you just kind of go with Salah regardless of the fixture at the moment. I do think the best fixture is Brentford at home for Palmer. Brentford at home are a good side, but away from home, obviously going to the Bridge this weekend, are a completely different animal. They concede a lot of big chances. They're one of the bottom teams in terms of the XGC per 90. So defensively, away from home, even at home aren't great, but away from home in particular are very poor. So I would be looking at Palmer as, I think, the standout option this game week. He is expected the most points from Fantasy Football Hub at 8.1, which is a little bit better than the likes of Haaland and Salah, although there's not much in it, so you could easily put up good arguments for either of them instead. But again, he's in the form of his life. He's on penalties, 90-minute man again. All of these players are really, but with that fixture at home to Brentford, I do see him cashing in on that, and I do think that given the fact that his data is now almost matching the likes of Salah and Haaland, and the attacking returns are flowing, I think that fixture just tips him over the edge in my mind. That makes him the slightly standout captain this week. Although it isn't cut and dry between him and Salah. It is very close. Salah has been absolutely inevitable. Palmer has been more blowing hot and cold. So if you want more of a safety pick, Salah's probably the man. If you want to chase the upside and go full attack at that fixture, which I do believe is better, and where I'll be going personally, is probably Cole Palmer. So I did mention towards the start of the video that I had a bit of a defensive dilemma this week, and although my 3 starters look really solid, one of them is Gabriel at home to Everton, and he is, of course, as it stands, a risk to start. And given what we know about Arteta, I think it's fairly unlikely that we get any concrete news going into the deadline that Gabriel is definitely fit or definitely not fit, which gives me a little bit of a problem because my 2 bench defenders at the moment are Rico Lewis, who has got a suspension, and even if he didn't, let's face it, he hasn't been great recently either. And I've also got Greaves as my 5th defender, who didn't play at all in game week 15, despite not being injured. So it's definitely a big risk for me to go into game week 16 with 2 fit defenders and maybe 1 shaky defender in Gabriel. So I might look at upgrading or moving away from Lewis to another defender with my 1 of 2 free transfers, just to shore up my defence and probably have whoever I bring in on my bench this week, but more of a long-term view on bringing in a player that I feel fairly secure on over the next 10 to 12 game weeks before I next look at wildcarding. The 2 players that I'm really keen on at the moment are Daniel Munoz and Kirkez as well at Bournemouth. So both of these players I think are going to make great picks over the next few game weeks. Kirkez in particular has very good fixtures over the next 5, 3 really good home games in there, so opportunities for clean sheets. And surprisingly, Bournemouth's underlying defensive data is actually very good this season at 1.24 XGC per 90. That's way better than I thought they would be. And Kirkez, despite maybe not giving great attacking data at 0.09 XGI per 90, it's not terrible, and at his price point at just 4.6 million, he's a differential, he's got a bit of upside, and Bournemouth have some good home fixtures where there's a chance that they keep clean sheets, and they have been very good at home this season as well. So I think he is a good pick, but Daniel Munoz is another player that's really tempting me. 0.1 more expensive, but I can move across from Lewis at 4.7 directly to Munoz at 4.7 as well. But it's the underlying data that's really tempting me at the moment. That 0.24 XGI per 90 is incredible, but what this doesn't show is the fact that 3/4 of that is made up of XG, which means he's got far greater goal threat than I think any other defender in the league at the moment at 0.19 XG per 90. He scored 2 in his last 3 game weeks, and he's getting off shots almost every single week, which again, for a defender, is really, really good news. The way Palace are setting up at the moment with their wing-backs bombing up high really tempts me, because Munoz always finds himself at the back post. We saw it at the end of last season as well, where he was really unlucky not to get more attacking returns than he has done. Whereas this season, although to start with it wasn't really paying dividends, it looks like a slight shift in focus has meant that Munoz is finding himself in those areas once again, and now he's actually starting to finish his chances too. So although the next 5 fixtures aren't looking great, I think as a long-term hold, he is a really interesting option, especially if I probably want to bench him in game week 17 when he plays Arsenal. Not a great game, of course, but after that, there are a lot of weeks where I'm pretty happy to be starting him, and Palace aren't a million miles away from running into a good fixture run. So he is a player that's really tempting me. I think if I wanted to save a little bit of money, I could look at someone like Colwill at Chelsea, but I've just got this sneaky suspicion that Chelsea aren't that capable of keeping clean sheets at the moment. They are all guns blazing going out for attack. Their defensive data isn't amazing. I think it's 1.43, which is actually worse than Bournemouth's. And Colwill has 0 to very little goal threat going forwards as well. I think it's less than Kirkes even. So with all of that taken into account, very little upside on Colwill, only 0.2 cheaper. I think I'd more prefer to be going for someone with a bit more upside or a bit better defensive data, even if the fixtures aren't quite there at the moment. So right now, I like the look of Munoz. I do like the look of Kirkes, but if I had to pick between the two, I think I'm slightly favouring Munoz, as long as I can find a route where I don't need to rely on him to start in game week 17, where Palace have, of course, a really tough fixture. Right then, so let's take a look at my team selection ahead of the deadline. At the moment, 2 free transfers, 0.3 in the bank, and overall, looks like a pretty strong side for this week. Lots of good fixtures in there with players that I'm really happy to own for the medium to long term. Of course, if there was one problem in my starting 11, it would be Gabriel, who is, of course, a risk ahead of the deadline. But outside of that, looks pretty strong. I think if I was to make the transfer, it would be on my bench to bring in someone like Daniel Munoz over Lewis, and probably keep him on my bench, but knowing that I've got that little bit more security in case Gabriel doesn't start, knowing that Greaves isn't himself a reliable starter for Ipswich at the moment either. Elsewhere though, I do have that double Arsenal defence if Gabriel does start at home to Everton. Looks very, very tempting. And of course, I do have Porro away at Southampton alongside Lewis Hall against Leicester at home, so it's a good backline overall. In midfield, I've got the 3 premium assets, Palmer, Salah and Saka, all 3 of which have great home games and all 3 of which aren't bad captaincy shouts for this week. As I mentioned previously in this video, my captain is going to go towards Cole Palmer, given the fixture, and Salah probably gets the vice, although I am expecting Salah to hurt me, given his ownership and the fact that at the moment, he does seem to be fairly inevitable when it comes to his goal-scoring streak. Semenyo is really frustrating me at the moment. He's got good data, but just quite simply isn't putting up the attacking returns. Against West Ham, it is a great home fixture. I'm really hoping that Semenyo as a differential comes in clutch for me this week. In my forward line, again, it's 3 strikers who have good fixtures, but I'm just a little bit worried about overall right now. Jackson has gone off the boil a little bit, been taken off early in game week 15. I'm really hoping that he starts to cash in on the underlying data and puts up a bit of a fight in comparison to someone like Isak, who yet again, it looks like I'm going without in game week 16, but a player that I'm very fearful of. Brentford at home, though, is a good fixture, so it would be silly to get rid of Jackson this week if you think he starts, and at the moment, we have no reason to think he shouldn't. Solanke away at Southampton is a great fixture. He's been frustrating recently as well, but the data's good and the fixture is amazing. I really like the matchup as well. Those central positions for the opposition against Southampton are really cashing in recently. Solanke is very much that, so fingers crossed that he does put up a bit of a decent performance in that game. Pedro as well up top, a little bit frustrating recently, but for his price, you're getting what you are paying for, I suppose. He is on penalties. He did play centre forward recently as well, so maybe a little bit of a positional change. At home to Crystal Palace, we'll see how that pays off because it usually is a fairly cagey game, but he himself is putting up good data, and at the price, I think he's a very decent hold right now. On my bench, Rodgers away at Nottingham Forest isn't the worst player to be relying on if there's a shock injury, but I think that is the worst fixture out of all of the players in my front seven, so I'm fairly happy to bench him ahead of the likes of Semenyo, Pedro, or someone like Solanke. I don't think there's too much competition there, but again, if he came off my bench, it's not the end of the world, and I probably wouldn't be using a transfer if I did hear about any sort of one game week injury for any of my front seven at this point in time. As we reach the end of today's video, do let me know what your own dilemmas are ahead of the deadline, and I'll try and answer you in the comments before we lock in our sides. And if you did enjoy the video, you could support my channel by leaving a like on this video and, importantly, subscribing so you don't miss out on any future content. But I am looking to try to get to 2,500 subscribers before we hit 2025. If you can help me on my way to getting there, I would be eternally grateful. In the meantime, though, good luck in Game Week 16, and I'll see you on the other side as we prepare our sides for Game Week 17.